There's no doubt about it. President Putin's Russia has taken the world into completely uncharted waters. The EU are now preparing to toughen sanctions against Russia amid allegations of war crimes in the Ukrainian town of Bucha.
Well, Labour has renewed calls for the UK to throw out the Russian ambassador after other European countries took measures to expel dozens of Russian diplomats. But should even more be done? Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer joins us now from Salford. Lots to talk to you about this morning, Keir.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. So, look, where are we? It's hard, I know, and possibly a slightly unfair question to say what would Labour do differently, because you haven't been in charge in the management of us getting to this point. But as we are at this point, what would you do? Would you somehow dismantle the UN as Zelensky called for, or would you, kick our ambassador out? We know that. What steps would you do right now to somehow feel like we're going forward? Yeah,
well, look, thank you for that. Just starting with those awful images coming out of Ukraine in the last few days, they're horrific. And they're really harrowing, and I think nobody who's looked at them can be left untouched by them. I actually turned the newspaper front pages over at home the other day because I didn't want our children to even see the images. And I think it's very important that when we see acts like this, that we call them out. They are war crimes, and we need to speak with one voice, which is that every single person who's been involved in any way in those atrocious acts has to be held to account through the International Criminal Court. They're war crimes, and those individuals need to be hunted down. The evidence needs to be retained now to make sure that nobody gets away with this.
No,
now,
that's true, and you're a lawyer and you would do that. And I think with one voice, actually, everyone is saying that. We need urgent investigation to provide the facts so that we can make sure no one gets away with it. I guess what people feel, and you're right, I think there's a danger when you see these images that the lack of sense of power we have as individuals to prevent anything more happening becomes almost overwhelming, and people are in danger of turning away. But we can't, can we? And we need leaders of parties like you to do more. And it's hard to know what more can be done right now to prevent something awful happening right now in Ukraine, another war crime this morning.
Yeah, and I think what we need to do is to make sure that we ramp up the sanctions and toughen the sanction. I know there's been talk of that in the last 24 hours, and I completely support that. And, of course...
So you'd cut off Russian gas and oil this morning, even though our energy bills will go up because of it. You just simply do it, would you?
We need to move forward on this. We've got to move forward collectively, so I want collective agreement. There's nothing Putin wants more than to see the UK and its allies all fall out about this and take different strategies. We mustn't do that. So whatever we do, it must be agreed with our international allies, and we take the effective action in lockstep with them. The other thing I should say, and it may seem odd as leader of the opposition, is that I also think it's very important that when we're talking about our response to these atrocious acts, that we don't have a party political divide back here in the United Kingdom. Obviously, I want the government to go further on sanctions. I do think there are loopholes in the sanctions the government's put forward, and I'd like to see those closed as quickly as possible. But rather than just say the government's got it wrong, what I'd do is invite the government to bring forward even tougher sanctions. And I can say to you and your viewers, if they do that, we, the Labour Party, will vote for them straight away, because we do need tougher sanctions going forward. But it's got to be done in agreement with our allies.
That's very clear. So on this level, we're talking about ramping up the sanctions, and we're talking about some kind of Nuremberg trial type of war crimes trial and sanctions against those who are found guilty, even in absentia, some way of punishing them. That's on that level. Let's move it up a grade. What do we do about the United Nations? Here we have a government, a Russian government, behaving as most people agree, like the Nazi Party behaved in Europe in the late 30s and into the 1940s. And yet, there they are on the Security Council. There they are with a veto, the same veto that we have, that America has. What do we do about the UN? Can we, should we, kick Russia out of the UN?
Well, we're going to have to think about what we do about Russia's place in the UN. I completely agree with that. What I don't want to see is any weakening of the UN at the moment. We've got the UN as a collective body. We've got NATO, who've held together incredibly well in relation to this. We mustn't start weakening or dismantling these bodies at the moment. I don't duck this. I think we're going to have to look at the position of Russia in relation to the UN in due course. But at the moment, we have to stand with our allies. I should just, Richard, add one thing, if I may, which is, of course, the provision of military equipment to Ukraine is very, very important. The civilians and the soldiers, the army in Ukraine are fighting with the utmost courage. I mean, it's really incredible to see. And we need to provide all of the military equipment that we can to support them in that.
Just on that, as you brought it up, we know Australia, UK and US countries have announced further spending this morning towards hypersonic missiles and defence against them. Would Labour spend more on defence, and would Labour try and keep the nuclear deterrent? Because the spectre of Putin's finger on the nuclear button has changed a lot of people's views about that. So would Labour keep that and spend more on defence?
The nuclear deterrent we would keep. We're absolutely committed to it. We voted for it, and it's been an essential part of our sort of weaponry and our response to aggression for many, many years. Labour, the Labour government was the government that was there at the founding of NATO. Ernest Bevin, our Secretary of State, signed that document. So for Labour, that's an unshakable commitment. We want to see the government look again at defence spending. I think lots of people are very concerned that there is a further 10,000 troops to be cut by this government by 2025. That's going to have to be looked at again. But I do think right here, right now, that what's important is that collectively with our allies, we provide just as much equipment as we all collectively agree that we can
you said that,
to be
Sir Keir.
effectively used at the moment.
Sir Keir, can I bring you back to just one more question on the United Nations? You're a very senior lawyer. You're head of the Crown Prosecution Service. You know about these things. Do you think it is possible, legally, to unpick Russia's role in the UN? Can we actually eject them legally? Is there a way through, do you think?
Well, it's very complicated because those rules have been in place for a very long time and it can't be done speedily. But I think in due course after this, we are going to have to look again at the composition of the UN. I don't want to see it weakened in any way. I think just at the moment, weakening the ability of countries to come together and take decisions and act would be a step backwards. But in due course, you know, we are going to have to look at these international alliances and agreements and see whether change is appropriate. But it's a complicated business that will take, you know, a very, very long time. And it's not, I think for Ukraine, if I was in Ukraine fighting on the ground, I'd say, well, that's probably tomorrow's debate. Yes. Today, we want to know what you can do right now.
All right. And a personal opinion here, please. Do you believe that Putin is, if you like, a Hitler for the 21st century?
Well, I think he's a war criminal. This is Russian aggression. It's not only an unlawful invasion, for which Putin should stand trial, in my view. We should set up a tribunal, a Nuremberg-style tribunal, so that he can stand trial for the invasion itself. On top of that, we have these awful war crimes being committed, as we were discussing earlier. And it's very important that, I know these things take time, but every single person who's involved in that right now needs to know you will be hunted down for as long as you live and be brought to trial for what you have done. It's very important that, and here again, no party political divides, I'm afraid. Don't want to start having squabbles with other political parties or NATO allies. Let's all speak with one voice. Every single person involved in any way in those war crimes must be held to account. And I know that's a common view, and that is a very good thing.
Well, no party political divide on that point, but in the time that we have left, something that I know there's a party political divide between you and the government on, and that's the national insurance right that comes into force today. Of course, they're initially for social care to get more funding, 500 million, and also actually now, since the pandemic, they're to clear the backlog, which we know is causing people to suffer so much. Right. I'm surprised this morning how many people have got in touch with us and say, actually, they'll live with the national insurance rise if it goes to deal with that, because the pain of that, on top of the cost of living crisis, is just awful. Your problem is with timing, but when is the timing right to put up and take this amount of money of all of us as taxpayers in order to get a better National Health Service, in order to get better social care and to try and ease the pain we're all living through?
Yeah, well, I know you've been discussing this at great length in recent weeks, and quite right too, because there's a real cost of living crisis. Everybody knows prices are going through the roof, wages are going through the floor. Only last week we had the energy bill hike of hundreds of pounds that people can't afford, and then today the government chooses to impose new tax on people, and it's only on working people, by the way. So if you're working, you get taxed. If you're a landlord with very many properties, if you make your money from stocks and shares, you don't pay a penny more as a result of the changes today. So it's the wrong tax at the wrong time. And also, it's the 15th tax increase from the Chancellor. And so now we've got the highest tax burden for 70 years. And I think for so many people who are struggling, there's a sense of a government that is totally out of touch with what they're doing. Now, the government says, well, we need this money. We've got to put it towards the health service and then social care. But that leaves out of account that over 11 billion pounds was either wasted or lost in fraud in the last 2 years. And the government even trying to claw it back from those that had that money. And so I'm afraid, you know, the sad reality is that a lot of the money that's gathered through this tax increase today, in the end, is going to be filling a black hole left by the incompetence of the government on finances.
And finally, Sir Keir, very briefly, please, you talk about unity. You speak very convincingly about that, and that obviously means supporting the Prime Minister in his endeavours over Ukraine. What if the Prime Minister gets fined for Partygate? Would your unity still hold, or would you suggest that he resigned?
No, it wouldn't hold at all. My view is he should go. Right. There were rules in place, as you both know, and your viewers will know, which were really hard for millions of people who kept to those rules, and that meant heartbreaking decisions. The very idea that there's partying in Downing Street, and now the government and his ministers say, oh well, just move on. Move on. We may have broken the law. You know, lots of fines already in place. Just move. You don't move on from decency. You don't move on from honesty, I'm afraid. And the moment we say that doesn't matter anymore, we're taking a massive step back for our democracy.
And if Johnson did stand down, which of course he wouldn't, but if he did, and you got that wish, if he was fined, who do you think would make a good Tory Prime Minister?
I'm probably the least...
That's why I asked.
The person who shouldn't be... I'll take on whoever is the Tory Prime Minister, whoever it is, I don't mind.
All right.
But as I say, they're probably not the best person to ask. I think we should change not just the Prime Minister, but the party and have a Labour government.
All right, a googly to finish with. Thank you, Sir Keir.